Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Tea for One. I'm your host, Rowan, and we will dive into all topics tea-related. Biology, history, culture, growing tea, producing tea, and so much more. Episode 4 will focus on American tea culture and modern and historical practices. What does modern American tea culture look like? How do other tea cultures influence what we see in America? And why did they waste so much beautiful tea at the Boston Tea Party? Hopefully we can answer all those questions by the end of this episode. So, before we begin, I highly recommend you get a nice cup of tea and find a peaceful spot to listen as we talk about Camellia sinensis. Despite most Americans preferring coffee over tea, a considerable amount of people enjoy a good cup of tea. But it wasn't even the British that brought tea over to the colonies originally, it was the Dutch. In the early 1600s, the Dutch had a colony right where modern-day New York is, called New Amsterdam. Although the Dutch colony was quickly given to join the rest of the British colonies, they brought a lot of the tea culture. At the time, it was customary to serve tea with the best silver strainers, the finest porcelain cups and pots, and a wooden tea caddy. Tea times found their way into homes across the eastern seaboard, and interestingly enough, it was not bound by class. Perhaps the common colonists did not have a silver teapot, but they did have a kettle, and they enjoyed tea time all the same. In Salem, Massachusetts, tea leaves were boiled to create a bitter brew, then served as a vegetable side dish with butter. By the time of the American Revolution, tea was drunk everywhere from the backwoods to the cities. Of course, knowing a bit of American history, this love for tea does not last. The view of tea in American culture began to shift when the British government introduced the Townshend Act in 1767. Tea was taxed as part of these laws, which made it less affordable for the American people, especially the lower class. However, knowing the American way, cheaper tea was still smuggled into America. Later, in 1773, the Tea Act was put into place, which allowed the East India Company to gain a monopoly, of course, on tea sales in America by being able to sell the teas at a price that was cheaper than both the colonial tea importers and tea smugglers. The British government did this to be able to continue to collect tea on taxes on American colonies. However, the British were unable to hide these taxes from the colonies and only managed to enrage the colonists further. In the fall of 1773, the colonists took action in one of the most iconic acts of American Revolutionary history, the Boston Tea Party. 7 ships carrying East India Company tea were sent to the colonies. 4 were bound for Boston, and 1 each for New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. In these ships were more than 2,000 chests containing nearly 600,000 pounds of tea. Americans learned these details on the Tea Act while the ships were en route and began planning their opposition. To clarify, the protest movement that culminated in the Boston Tea Party was not actually about high taxes. The price of legally imported tea was actually reduced by the Tea Act of 1773. Instead, protesters were concerned with the variety of other issues. The familiar no taxation without representation argument, along with the question of the extent of Parliament's authority on the colonies, which remained prominent. So in every colony except Massachusetts, protesters were able to force the tea merchants to resign or return to England with the tea. In Boston, they went one step further. They refused to grant permission of the tea ships to leave without the import duty, creating a standstill. During the time the ships were trapped at the harbor, the colonists planned. Soon-to-be founding father, Samuel Adams, was leading a meeting, but lost control of the crowd as they started to pour out of the meeting hall to take action. Some of these protesters disguised themselves as Mohawk warriors, not to reveal their identities and to symbolically show that they chose American soil over the British. So, a group of about 100 men boarded these 3 ships and over the course of 3 hours dumped all 342 chests of tea into the water. The property damage amounted to the destruction of 92,000 pounds of tea reported by the East India Trade Company, worth about 10,000 pounds or close to $2 million in today's money. The final shipment intended for Boston had run aground in Cape Cod. I would also like to add that it is a contentious point in history on how much Samuel Adams aided the Boston Tea Party protesters. Some say he signaled for the Tea Party to begin, and others say he tried to stop the crowd from going to the ships. John Adams, who ended up being a founding father and second president of the United States, wrote in his diary about this event. Last night, 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This morning a man of war sails. This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity, and an effort of all the patriots that I greatly admire. The people should never rise without doing something to be remembered, something notable and striking. This destruction of tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible it must have so important consequences, and so lasting that I cannot consider it but an epocha in history. Needless to say, after the Boston Tea Party, John Adams and many other Americans considered tea drinking to be unpatriotic. Boycotts of tea led to an increase in consumption of other beverages, such as coffee and herbal teas infused with peppermint, sage, or dandelions. This is where coffee started taking its place as the most popular caffeinated beverage in the States. Tea started making a comeback in the Victorian era with high-class tea parties, and with the revolution of the tea bag in 1908, tea slowly became a household beverage again. However, the Boston Tea Party still holds a firm, patriotic part of American history, and is often a point of comparison with more modern, bold acts of protest. It is often looked at as a good thing, unlike the other tea-related political event in American history, the Teapot Dome Scandal. Before the Watergate scandal, the Teapot Dome scandal was regarded as the greatest and most sensational scandal in the history of American politics. As terrible as this scandal was, at least there was no tea harmed in the making. In fact, there was no tea at all. The Teapot Dome part of the scandal actually comes from the Teapot Dome oil field in Wyoming, which has a massive natural rock that looks vaguely like a teapot, hence the name. But in short, the scandal involved members of the Warren G. Harding administration from 1921 to 1923. They were bribed by oil tycoons to allow them to have access to the Teapot Dome and other oil fields in the US without competition. The Secretary of Interior, Albert Bacon Fall, took the fall and became the first presidential cabinet member to go to prison. And of course, no one was convicted of paying the bribes. The two oil companies, though, Sinclair Oil Corporation and Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company, did pay Fall quite a bit, over $400,000 or just over $6 million in today's money. The Teapot Dome oil field stayed idle for about 49 years, but then went back into production in 1976. After the Teapot Dome had earned over $569 million in revenue from the 22 million barrels of oil extracted over the previous 39 years. The Department of Energy in February of 2015 sold the oil field for $45 million to the New York-based Stranded Oil Resources Corporation. Okay. We've discussed enough history though, let's switch the conversation. The United States is known for doing something either seen as groundbreakingly wonderful or straight up disgraceful. It's iced tea. Iced tea, at its core, is just iced black tea. Although iced green tea is a thing, albeit uncommon. Out of all the tea consumed in the United States, iced tea makes about 85%. Iced tea first started appearing in the States in the 1860s. It was seen as a novelty at first, but during the 1870s it became quite widespread. Recipes appeared in print, iced tea was offered at hotel menus, and it was on sale at railroad stations. Where iced tea truly took its place nationally was at the 1904 World Fair in St. Louis. Richard Bletcheden was a merchant and a tea plantation owner. At the time, iced tea had long been customary in the American South, but was not widely spread to other parts of the states. So, in 1904, Bletcheden reportedly decided that cool tea would be more profitable than hot tea during the years at the World Fair. The fair held in St. Louis that year was during a particularly hot period, driving up the sales of Bletcheden's iced tea. The beverage sold so well that it gained national popularity after this event, thus cementing iced tea as the most popular way to drink tea in the US. I should also note that iced tea and sweet tea are essentially the same thing. Sweet tea is just sweetened with sugar or corn syrup and traditionally found in the southeast of the US. In these states, when a person refers to tea, they normally mean sweetened iced tea. The unsweetened variants are often called unsweet tea instead of unsweetened or plain iced tea. The consumption of sweet tea with so many meals led it to be sometimes called the table wine of the South, and this trait is considered an important marker of culture for the southern United States. Southern sweet tea is made by brewing tea at double strength and then adding a large amount of sugar to the freshly brewed tea and diluting it to the proper strength. It is served over a glass full of ice cubes and is often garnished with a slice of lemon. While the high fructose corn syrup is commonly used as a sweetener for commercially manufactured tea, more often consumers are unaware of this, and when at home, they just use refined sugar. Another subset of iced tea is sun tea. Sun tea is frequently brewed in warmer areas by placing tea and room temperature water together in a glass jar left outdoors in direct sunlight. The sun itself is enough to brew the tea, but the steeping process is very long, usually 2 to 4 hours. Since sun brewing occurs at a temperature range that can promote the development of bacteria, particularly Alcalgenesis viscos lactis, the Center for Disease Control and the Tea Association of the USA, Inc. suggest storing sun-brewed tea in the refrigerator and then discarding it after 24 hours. Tea steeped in a jar on your porch won't get any hotter than 130 Fahrenheit and about the temperature of a really hot bath, and it's not nearly hot enough to kill any bacteria lurking in the water or the tea itself. For that, the water needs to be heated to near boiling for at least 3 to 5 minutes. Because of the danger, an alternative is suggested called refrigerator tea. Refrigerator tea is just tea brewed in the refrigerator overnight. This has the dual advantage of preventing growth of harmful bacteria, and the tea is already being cooled without the addition of ice. But did you know there was a time where the US was not almost exclusively drinking iced tea, or black tea for that matter? Before World War II, the US preference for tea was equally split between green and black tea at 40 and 40%, with the remaining 20% being preferring oolong. The war cut off the United States from its primary source of green tea, China and Japan, leaving it with tea almost exclusively from British-controlled India, which produced black tea. After the war, nearly 99% of tea consumed was black tea. Of course, green, oolong, and white teas have recently become more popular again, and are often touted as health foods. Other types of tea have been spreading through America too. For example, fast food coffee chains have made a huge impact on how Americans are exposed to herbal and exotic teas. Once considered a rarity, chai, based on the Indian masala chai, has actually become a popular option for people who might just drink a cafe latte. Authentic masala chai comes from boiling black tea in milk and water in a mixture of aromatic herbs like cinnamon, star anise, fennel seeds, peppercorn, nutmeg, clove, and many other spices. A chai latte that you would find in the US is a bit different, using steamed milk like a cafe latte, but instead of espresso, a spiced tea concentrate is used. And of course, iced chai lattes are common too. Although not as commercialized as chai or iced tea, Taiwanese-style bubble tea, or boba, has become more popular in the US in the recent years, often served at small local cafes in the same style as many coffee drinks. Bubble tea comes in many variations, usually consisting of black, green, oolong, and sometimes white tea as the base. Milk and other flavors like strawberry, taro, coconut, honeydew, and chocolate can be added, just to name a few. What makes the tea drink bubble tea are the tapioca pearls, aka boba, which come from a starch extracted from the storage roots of the cassava plant. This starch is made into a dough and then formed into small pearls which are boiled and sweetened with brown sugar, making them sweet and chewy. Of course, there are numerous flavors boba can have, like lychee, grass jelly, mango, coffee, and green tea, just to name a couple. Bubble tea is typically served in plastic takeaway cups with a sealed lid, which a large straw is used to puncture and drink from. The straw has to be larger in order to drink the gummy tapioca pearls. The last bit of American tea culture I want to discuss with you, it pains me. I have put it off long enough. I have completely ignored it in the episode about tea making, but it seems unavoidable now. It's instant tea. While America was fighting abroad in World War II in 1946, dark happenings were brewing at home. In 1946, Nestle USA introduced the first instant tea, Nestea. Instant teas are produced from black tea by extracting the liquor from the processed portion of tea, typically from off-grade black teas. The extract is then concentrated under low pressure and drying the concentrate to a powder by freeze drying, spray drying, or vacuum drying. Low temperatures tend to be used to minimize the loss of flavors. The American market for instant tea powders, which developed quickly following Nestle's introduction, has slackened off considerably over the past quarter of the century, thankfully. as Americans have more and more turned to naturally icing their own favorite loose leaf teas, as well as preparing iced tea from tea bags. Still, ready-to-drink iced teas can be found in the supermarkets. Anyways, hopefully you learned something interesting about America's history with tea and the tea culture that has come from it. This is Tea for One, and until next time.